I'm sure everybody saw the revenue forecast that came out yesterday. I would characterize it as disappointing, but not surprising. Anybody who has been following the economic news over the past couple of months, anybody who has been following Dr. Elutra's forecasts, knew that there's a lot of volatility and uncertainty in the financial markets and the economy. And I think we are finally seeing some of that crystallize in our forecasts here in Washington. The very indefatigable Jason Mercier from the Washington Policy Center kind of posed a rhetorical question on Twitter this morning that was, if you had $10 today, thought you were going to have $15 tomorrow, and it turns out you're only going to have $13 tomorrow, are you $3 better off or $2 worse off? And I think that paradox kind of illustrates what Senate Republicans and House Republicans have been saying in terms of the budget for the past several years. We knew that times were very, very good, and we were beating the drum trying to use those good times to provide tax relief to the people who needed it the most, funding the working families tax credit, providing broad-based tax relief, but not nearly enough was done. And nothing was done when inflation was the highest, state revenues were the highest. It was the easiest time to do it and the time it was most needed. And the majority parties could not find it in themselves to do what states like California, New York, New Jersey, Massachusetts all were able to do. And now with revenue down by about $800 million, revenue projections down by about $800 million over this 5-year budget period, it looks like that might be an impossible Gordian knot to untie at this point. We'll see. I think first and foremost, the biggest goal, as Senator Wilson mentioned, is avoiding any new tax increases at this point. That would just be disastrous for the state and entirely unnecessary. But I think House and Senate Republicans will continue to fight for responsible, sustainable budgets, knowing that the $800 million reduction in expected revenues that we saw yesterday could very well just be the tip of the iceberg, and we might have much more difficult budget times ahead of us. If we proceed cautiously and prudently and responsibly, we can minimize the fallout from these bad economic times and do our best to take care of the states most vulnerable. If we spread ourselves too thin, we set ourselves up for even deeper failure than we would otherwise realize. So I think that'll be our message to our colleagues in the coming weeks as we debate and vote on the majority's budget packages.
I guess I'll start with you, Representative Stokesbary, because you were on the floor with a special education striking amendment a couple of weeks ago, and can you just tell us where special education funding is in your view, and compare and contrast the best you can those bills?
It's very clear that special education has been a source of underfunding in the state over the past at least the past 5 or 10 years, probably longer than that, but I can only speak to the time I've been here. I think there's broad bipartisan agreement on the need to improve those investments, but some disagreement over just how big of improvement is necessary. I think Republicans, are harking back to our McCleary days, which doesn't seem that long ago, but kind of was, of the need to fund education first. It's the paramount duty of the state. I understand that there are other needs, but we need to make sure we are fully funding all education, including special ed, first, and then we can sort out what's left after that and how much money we have to address those other needs. So I think the difference you saw was a difference in sort of scope of spending. There's also a really key policy difference in those two bills. Again, as I've always said, the point of education funding is not just to write checks, but is to improve outcomes. So the Senate, led by Senator Braun and some others, had a really novel idea of trying to include kind of advocates for kids going through the special education system to make sure that they are able to have an IEP plan that is developed and tailored to their needs that will help them succeed. If a kid is lucky enough to be born into a family with parents who have time to navigate the system and understand how to navigate the system, that is fantastic. Not every kid is quite so lucky. There's language barriers, time barriers, things like that. And so Senator Braun's idea would try to help take care of those kids as well. So the House Republican amendment to that bill would have both increased the amount of dollars spent on special ed, would have also included that key policy addition Unfortunately, that was voted down on a near party line vote, but it wasn't just a vote. You heard about a dozen speeches from House Republicans talking about how critical it is to fund this really serious need of the state. And as for the policy component to that, I was cautiously optimistic after the vote because there was a separate bill dealing with some special ed policy issues unrelated to funding, really. And was optimistic based on some conversations with that bill sponsor that we could maybe incorporate this advocate idea. Unfortunately, that other bill never came to the floor, so we weren't able to do so. So it still remains in flux. Our bill's over in the Senate. I think we have the Senate's bill. I'm optimistic we can improve on where the House Democrats landed at, but they're the ones with the 50 votes, so we'll see.
Hi, thanks for taking my questions. For Representative Stokesbury and Senator Wilson, I'm curious if you were the budget writer this year in the majority. I know you talked about a few different things, but what specific policies would you have in there and take a run at this year? And then also in terms of reserves, what type of hard dollar or percentage of reserves do you think should be in a finished budget this year?
Well, I guess I can make a stab at that. I think we would want to make sure we address the state's most urgent needs first, and fully fund our priorities, rather than spreading the money thin around peanut butter and trying to satisfy everybody. As I mentioned a minute ago, I think education is our paramount duty. I'm backed up in that thinking by the Constitution, which makes it clear that it's the paramount duty of the state. So I'd make sure that we were fully funding special education. Make sure that we were taking substantial, serious, data-driven steps to improve student outcomes, and in particular this year, addressing the learning loss that has occurred. So I think those would be a couple of our immediate priorities in the K-12 space. There are a number of other issues around housing, around mental health, around natural resources that I think would get our attention. But we would not try to pass a budget that did everything for everybody. We would try to focus on where our money could be most effectively spent. And we would be cautious and prudent. And I appreciate the question about reserves. So I don't have an exact dollar or percentage amount, but the state treasurer just sent an email or a letter to budget writers, I believe just yesterday, where he did some of that math. And so I would make sure that we were carefully and faithfully adhering to the treasurer's really excellent and prudent recommendations. He helps, among other things, manage our bond offerings. And so following those ratings or following that guidance will not only put us on solid financial ground for future budgets, it will also save the state money through lower interest costs. So I would look seriously at what the treasurer is recommending and follow those recommendations closely. And a little outside your question, but to the extent for the reserves that we do maintain, I would make sure that those are kept in the rainy day fund that is constitutionally protected and requires a supermajority vote to spend. An unfortunate trend of the past couple years has been the majority party siphoning off money out of the constitutionally protected rainy day fund into a separate account that does not require a supermajority vote to spend down. I think that is far beyond the spirit of our state constitution, and don't think that that is an appropriate measure to take. So